Congressman Bob Gibbs is asking Republicans to consider impeachment of President Biden over the eviction moratorium in the border crisis. So will it happen, though? He joins us now to discuss. Congressman, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
I'm glad to be with you, Dan. Obviously, it's not going to happen in this Congress under the control of the Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker, who's just a tyrant. But I think it does show that we're going to hold him accountable, and that's what it's about.
I'll let you get that adjusted, but the eviction moratorium, there's a lot of questions as to how in the world he could have legally, constitutionally have done that in the first place. I mean, he takes an oath to uphold the office of the land. He takes an oath to uphold the Constitution, and then here he goes. I mean, the way that I interpret this is that that's a clear violation of Prince v. United States, where you can't commandeer and abuse the 10th Amendment and demand that these states abide by federal regulatory policy. Is that the route that you're looking through?
Well, you're absolutely right. And then remember, 2 days before he did it, he said he didn't have the authority to do it. It was unconstitutional. And then 2 days later, he went and did it. So, he kind of admitted, he did admit that it was unconstitutional. And the thing is, if you don't hold him accountable and say, we're watching you, we're holding you accountable, what's to stop him from doing other things? If we just let this ride. And so that's why I think it's important that rank and file members like myself start moving forward and say, hey, the leadership, we got to have a serious conversation about this and let the president know, the administration know that we're watching, and he could be, things can happen when things do change, which I think they will change in November of 22.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And you're right, he did. He mentioned a couple of different times how he didn't have the authority to do it. He also said in one soundbite, and I played this on my radio program, that they knew it was going to be a slow process, that it was going to take the judges a while to, go through all of this, which that kind of seems to be his whole plan. Just slow walk it, have it, kind of take effect just enough for now. But I don't really think that the court system rewards that abuse of the process, though, do they?
No, I think the justices probably know they're getting played. And because President Biden, he said, well, we get maybe 30, 60 days or longer out of this by the time it takes the court to act. We can save people here. And I think what's also important to remember on this issue, nobody talks about the landlords. Remember, the landlords in this country, most of them are middle American, ordinary Americans that invested some of their money to try to build their equity and net worth for retirement. They might have 1 or 2 rentals, and they're stuck now having to pay the mortgages on those properties, the maintenance, and the property taxes. Think about that. And they could lose these properties because they might not be able to pay the property taxes without having zero money come in. And also remember, this is a contractual arrangement between the tenants and the landlords, and so this is an attack by the administration on private property rights. And so this goes pretty deep, and that's why he's got to know we're going to hold him accountable. And then the other article that I think ought to be put forth is at the southern border. What's happened there? We've got at least 7,000 people that have been transported around the country in buses and airplanes that tested positive for COVID, and now we're seeing a spike in the Delta variant. How many of those are illegal migrants? Nobody has answers for that. But there has to be some, because we're starting to see reports from the Border Patrol and the local government authorities down in Texas saying what's happening here. And here you got the president out there telling us we all got to wear masks. We might have to have lockdowns. And then he's got an open border. We got fentanyl coming across. I think about 8,000 to 9,000 pounds of fentanyl has been seized by the hard workers of our border agents. And where's this fentanyl coming from? We know where it's coming from. That's another issue. And he's not dealing with China, a communist government in China.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking with Congressman Bob Gibbs of Ohio, and that's the other big issue. This discussion of the border and the administration. They go and attack all these other Republican lawmakers, saying that it's DeSantis or it's Abbott or it's this one. They're all hampering our ability to mitigate the transmission here and deal with the transmission of the Delta variant. But yet, you bring up a good point too. When you look at the number of people that are coming across the border, and we've heard from Democrat mayors and Democrat county judges. The Hidalgo County judge is a Democrat, Cortez, and he's out there even saying the administration needs to get a hold on this. It's not. I mean, that just makes the case, I would think, in terms of not knowing where these people are going, and they're not testing everyone too.
Yeah, and now the question has to be raised: is this intentional? Letting the people come across the border and not do anything? And if that's the case, if this is intentional by the administration to let, actually will be millions of people coming in the United States and transferring all over the country. That's a big constitutional question that has to be asked, and that's why we need to start having the discussion in Congress and let the
Yeah,
people out
especially
here.
especially, Congressman, when you consider that the transmission rates are used to justify mandates called for certain areas, I think it definitely is worth it to discuss how many of those, because my radio program, we've called the Texas Department of Health, and they've been kind of cagey in terms of answering us. But from what we understand, the numbers of those who are coming across the border, those cases are added to the cases of residents and then filed with the Texas Department of Health, which makes certain counties look like those transmission rates are going through the roof. And then you have lawmakers elsewhere saying, well, we have to have mandates in these areas because of the transmission rate. And that's how the eviction moratorium is triggered in certain counties because of the transmission rate.
That's absolutely correct. And the hypocrisy of what's going on in this country by our elected leaders in the administration and the Democrats in Congress. And we know we do have some members of Congress now that are Marxists, and we're seeing some of these controls. And this other thing, when you go back to the eviction moratorium issue, who's going to supply the housing for these people that can't afford to buy a house? I've been a landlord in the past. Some tenants, that's what the only thing they can do, and that's not a bad thing. But think about that. Who's going to risk their capital, and if they're not going to have their contracts honored by their tenants, and if the government's going to step in and play this game?
And they overlook also the overwhelming number of minority landlords too. There was a study that came out looking at the breakdown of by race, ethnicity, et cetera, gender, even of landlords, and there's a significant number of Black and Hispanic families that are just the regular, average, everyday landlords. And we have this conversation in the country about building generational wealth. Well, you're not going to be able to do that if we're actually taking the tools away from people to do that through an eviction moratorium.
And one way, people build wealth is invest some of their hard-earned dollars, or they have some spare dollars, and buy some property and rent it out, and that's a way to build net worth. And then you're right. There's a lot of people, a lot of the Hispanics and other minorities are landlords, and most of them probably own one or two rentals, and that's about it. So you're really hurting them, where the big operators are actually aren't going to be affected as much.